Thank you. Please be seated. We're going to go back on the record on case 251-401-132, State of Utah versus Sundwall. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, welcome back. We ready with our next witness?
Yes, Sarah Varner.
Thank you. Please come forward. We'll get you sworn in.
Please raise your right hand. You do solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Thank you.
Come on up and have a seat. Thanks for being here. As long as you can keep that mic in front of you, it'll all work. Counsel.
Thank you, Judge. Good morning. Would you tell us your name and spell your last name, please?
Yeah, Sarah Varner, V as in Victor, A-R-N-E-R.
How are you employed?
For the Utah County Attorney's Office.
What do you do for the Utah County Attorney's Office?
I am a victim witness coordinator.
Are you subject to approval as far as any of your pay goes or anything by the attorneys in that office, the individual attorneys?
Sorry.
Job performance related to making the attorneys in the office happy?
Oh, no.
And what is your job involved?
I help all victims and witnesses in trial, make sure that they're here when they need to be, and we do trial prep with them, and then I just am here during the trials.
Okay, this morning, did you have an opportunity to meet with Mark Farnsworth?
Yes, I did.
And did you see him just testify a minute ago?
Yes, I did.
Were you present this morning when he reviewed the body camera that was played in court?
Yes.
Who else was there?
Lauren and Chelsea.
And by Lauren, you mean?
Oh, Lauren Hunt, the prosecutor.
Okay, and who is Chelsea?
She's our paralegal.
Okay. Were any instructions given to Mr. Farnsworth about how to testify regarding that clip?
No.
Was any more played than the 11 seconds that were played in court?
No.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Any questions, Mr. Williams?
No, Your Honor.
Thanks for being here. You can sit down. Next witness.
The state calls Scott Larson.
Good morning, sir. Please come forward. Come up here near the clerk and we'll get you sworn in. Come on up here.
Please raise your hand. You do solemnly swear the testimony you shall give in the case now before the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
Come on up here and have a seat. We appreciate you being here. As long as you can keep that mic in front of you at all times, we can make a good record and we'll all be able to hear. Thank you. Counsel.
Good morning. If you could state your name for the record.
My name is Scott Larson, L-A-R-S-O-N.
What is your occupation?
I am a forensic toxicologist.
Briefly tell us what that means.
Forensic toxicology is the field of testing biological specimens for drugs, alcohol, and poisons.
I want to talk about what kind of training and education is required for this position. Can you briefly go through your educational background?
Yes, I have a bachelor's degree in science in biology and another bachelor of science in medical technology and a master's degree in pharmaceutical sciences.
How long have you been a forensic toxicologist?
For just over 20 years.
Does it require, you just listed the degrees that you have, does it require those degrees, the job?
Some base level science degree is necessary, yes.
Does it require, does your specific job title require any certifications?
I've been board certified by the American Board of Forensic Toxicology since 2010, and that's one of the requirements at my employment.
To keep that board certification, do you have to do some kind of continuing education requirements every year, anything like that?
Yes, I've been doing continuing education over the course of my entire career, but specifically, the board certification requires a minimum amount of continuing education per year that gets documented and turned in.
Or do you always keep current on that?
Yes.
When we're talking about your job, is it fair to call them tests? Or do you run tests on blood or specimens for substances? How should I refer to that?
Tests or assays, yes.
About how many tests do you perform in a typical year?
Well, for my position at this point, what I do is review. So in terms of reviewing analytical data, I review roughly 12,500 cases per year.
At what point, I guess at one point in your career, did you actually do the testing?
Yes, for many years. I started as a bench toxicologist in my first job and did that for probably the first 10 to 15 years.
And now it sounds like your job is to review the tests that have been done by somebody else?
Yes.
And what are you reviewing for? What does that look like?
So the NMS, where my laboratory that I work for, we run basically in like an assembly line type system, and I'm on the last phase of that line. And what I look at is all of the initial documentation that gets turned into our laboratory, the chain of custody, which tracks the sample and what happens to the sample through its lifespan and testing at the lab, all of the analytical screening data, confirmation data. I write the report and then release it to the to the agency that requested it.
Do you know what case we're here today about?
Yes.
Kacee Terry, does that name ring a bell?
Yes.
Did you review the testing that was done on the specimens involved in this case?
Yes, I released 2 reports on this case.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as States Exhibit 13. You have a screen up there. Let me know when you're able to see that. Sometimes it flickers a bit before it stays.
Came and went. It's on. Oop.
It'll just takes a bit to warm up.
Do you see that?
I do, yes.
Do you recognize that?
I do, yes.
What is this?
This is a toxicology report released from our laboratory.
Is this something that you prepared or
Yep.
reviewed?
Yes,
Sorry, which of those? Prepared, reviewed, both?
both.
State moves to admit Exhibit 13.
No objection.
Court received States 13, wish to publish.
Yes, thank you. All right, before we get to, there's a box that says positive findings. I'm going to get to those in a second. If we can scroll down, I want to ask just briefly so the jury can understand when we're talking about, it says gray stopper, red stopper, different tubes and caps. I want to go through what those things mean. So I guess, can you explain the different tube types? Let's start there.
Yes, a gray stopper tube is, excuse me, a gray stopper tube is the recommended tube in forensic toxicology. It contains 2 different components, potassium oxalate and sodium fluoride. The potassium oxalate helps make it so the blood does not coagulate and stays in a liquid form. The sodium nitrate, or the sodium fluoride, I'm sorry, is an antibacterial, so that will eliminate bacterial growth within the blood sample. A red top tube or a red stopper tube does not contain anything, and that means there will be levels of coagulation in serum. A white cap plastic container, the specimen number 8, the liver, came in, does not contain anything. It's just a normal plastic cup with no additives whatsoever. These different types of containers are used just because different tests have different recommendations on what additives are needed. So, but gray top tubes is standard in forensic toxicology.
Okay. If we look over a few columns, there's something labeled matrix source, and there's hospital blood, femoral blood, and a few other things. What does hospital blood mean?
Hospital blood is just blood that is collected at the hospital prior to death.
Prior to death.
Yes.
What does femoral blood mean?
Femoral blood is postmortem blood, and that is what's called peripheral blood, and that would be collected from your femoral artery, which is in the kind of the upper section of your thigh.
When you're doing your testing or your review, does it make a difference whether something is hospital blood or femoral blood?
It does not make any difference in the testing. That's all done the same. It does make differences sometimes in your interpretation of those results.
So it looks like in this case we have both hospital blood and femoral blood.
Yes.
Why might that make a difference in results?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons. I think the first one is if you look under collection, date, and time, the hospital blood was drawn on August 12th of 2024, where the femoral blood was collected on August 16th. So with that 4-day window, there you would expect different results because your body could metabolize, things like that. So the hospital blood would be theoretically, we would receive results that would happen before any the hospital, anything that the hospital would have given them. You'd see those results more in the femoral blood, so you'd see differences in the results.
And then also you mentioned hospital blood is prior to death, femoral blood is after death. Can death make a difference in what's in, I guess, a sample?
Yes, it can. There's different types of activities that can happen in the body post-death. One of them is called postmortem redistribution, which is just the kind of diffusion of drugs from your central cavity throughout your body. So that can kind of increase the concentration of certain drugs. You sometimes can also get, in certain circumstances, increases or the artificial creation of ethanol from bacteria in your body using glucose to create alcohol. So things like, there are some differences, yes.
Okay. I want to scroll down on the exhibit. At the top, we see detailed findings, analysis, and comments. I want to go through this. The first one is naloxone, and I'm sorry, to clarify, these would be, I guess, tell us what exact findings these relate to. I guess, what patient are we talking about?
This would be from Kacee Terry.
Okay. What is naloxone?
Naloxone is a opiate antagonist drug that's used usually in hospitals, but now you can get it outside of hospital use to stop opiate overdoses.
And the result here was what?
It was presumptive positive. This is something that came up in our initial drug screen that is not part of normal confirmation. So it came up on a screen, but it was not confirmed.
Is naloxone typically given in a medical setting in certain circumstances?
Typically, yes. Many times if someone is kind of struggling, they will nowadays, hospitals will just automatically give naloxone based on the rise of opiate overdoses across the country.
So even if it's not confirmed that an opioid overdose is...
Yes, because it doesn't hurt anyone, so it'll either help them or it doesn't matter.
Okay. The next one we see down is oxycodone free. What is oxycodone, first of all?
Oxycodone is a narcotic analgesic used for pain relief.
And what does the free mean?
It can be found in two different ways in the body, either free, which means not bound by plasma, or conjugated. So we test for free, which is the normal forensic way, but we just like to clarify what we're reporting.
Okay. What was the result here for oxycodone?
It was It came up in the initial drug screen, and then it was then followed by a confirmation, and it was 34 nanograms per mil.
And that, what was the specimen source for that?
Hospital blood.
34 nanograms per milliliter. Help us understand what that result means.
34 nanograms per mil would be considered a therapeutic dose of oxycodone.
For anybody?
Yes, I mean, that would be like your normal prescription with a tablet. Obviously, there are different prescription. I mean, doctors would give different people different prescription amounts of the amount that they would take, but this falls within the range that you would expect.
So you would not expect 34 nanograms per milliliter to cause an overdose?
Not unless there's very unique circumstances.
We talked before about naloxone, which is given if an opioid overdose is suspected. Does that, would that being given at the hospital lower the oxycodone level in the blood?
It wouldn't change the oxycodone level. What it would mean is the oxycodone would not be able to bind to the appropriate receptor because the naloxone would be blocking that receptor.
Okay, so this
So
34...
it doesn't change the concentration, just whether it's activating the downstream effect in the body.
Okay. We're talking about Kacee Terry here. If she had been prescribed oxycodone and had been taking it for years, does that matter in your interpretation of these levels?
It would. There's something in the human body called tolerance that basically, as you take, the more you take any drug, your body creates a certain level of tolerance to some of the side effects from that. So that's one of the questions I always would. It is a metabolite of oxycodone. So as oxycodone is breaking down in your body, there's a different enzymatic pathways that break it down to that, and then to other later stage compounds, which is just a way for the body to get rid of the oxycodone out of your body.
Okay, so I'm going to ask you a few questions just to make sure that I and the jury understand. You referenced something called a metabolite. What does that mean?
So when you take any drug, or most drugs, not every drug, but most drugs, your body will start breaking it down into similar compounds that are easier to clear out of the body.
So when we're talking about oxymorphone and oxycodone, is oxymorphone a separate drug that is given, or when you're talking about being a metabolite, it's what oxycodone turns into inside of the body? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, and the answer is it can be both.
Okay.
It would be my interpretation based on the ratios of the oxycodone to oxymorphone found in this case, that most likely this the decedent was taking oxycodone, and the oxymorphone that we found was as a metabolite and not taken as a separate drug.
Okay. Here we see under oxymorphone, the result is what?
2.7 nanograms per mil, which is about roughly 1/10 the oxycodone, which is roughly the relationship we see.
So when you're talking about the ratio leading to your interpretation that it's a breaking down metabolite, is that relevant to that?
Yes.
Let's go to the next one, promethazine. What is that?
Promethazine is an antihistamine that's found in over-the-counter allergy medication.
Does it require a prescription? I know you just mentioned over-the-counter.
No, typically it does not.
Is it also something that can be prescribed in certain circumstances? If you know?
There are probably prescriptions, but the majority of the people that use promethazine are just from over-the-counter medications.
I believe you said it's an antihistamine. Does it have any other uses that it is given for?
There may be some off-level use or off-label uses, but I'm not aware of that.
Does promethazine have any central nervous system effects?
Promethazine is an interesting drug in terms of it's been shown there's a wide variance within the population. The majority of time it has central nervous system depressant effects. There is a subset of the population that will have stimulant effects from it, so it kind of falls on both sides. But in general, it's thought of as having central nervous system depressant effects.
And maybe everybody knows this, maybe this is common knowledge, but briefly tell us what central nervous system depressant effects means.
So there's different, you can have stimulant effects or depressant effects. Depressant effects in general could lead to things like drowsiness, maybe a little bit of uncoordination depending on the drug. And then that would be your normal symptoms that you would just get. In worst case scenario, it can lead to respiratory depression and death.
You mentioned worst case scenario. I guess, let me ask first, what's the result we see here?
It is 370 nanograms per mil.
What does that level indicate to you?
That would indicate to me, I would still consider that a therapeutic level of promethazine. There's a fairly wide range in promethazine of what people see in terms of the therapeutic. There's a very long, it takes the body a long time to eliminate promethazine. So if someone is taking it for example, for like allergy medication for like multiple days, because it takes a long time for your body to eliminate it, you can kind of build up concentration even if you're taking it at normal doses.
You mentioned worst case scenario, you might even see a death from this substance. Is this level anywhere near that level?
Well, to clarify, I was talking about just in general of central nervous system depressants.
Oh, okay.
But
Thank you.
no, I would consider this within the therapeutic range of promethazine.
Is there a concentration of promethazine, like a level that would start being concerning to you? There's
been promethazine itself as a sole drug. There have been overdoses reported at, say, 4,000, 5,000 nanograms per mil. There are some mixed drug intoxications at like the 1,800 nanogram per mil range, but I'm not aware of any where this would be one of the main drugs this low, especially with in context with the other drugs that are found.
The next one down is alprazolam. What is that?
Alprazolam is a benzodiazepine that's used to treat like anxiety.
And again, maybe this is common knowledge, but briefly explain what a benzodiazepine is.
So there are a lot of benzodiazepines on the market. They are used for a really broad range of uses, a lot of them tied to anxiety.
Does that have a central nervous system depressant effect?
Yes.
What's the result that we see here?
100 nanograms per mil.
Is this a level that was concerning to you?
It's on the high end of the therapeutic range, but within what you would expect, depending on how it was taken.
When you're reviewing these results and creating this report, are you aware that a death has occurred?
Oh, I'm aware that deaths occurred just because postmortem samples were submitted to the laboratory. I rarely have very much information when I'm releasing the report. So kind of toxicology falls into two phases. One is the analytical testing, and that's what I focus on when I'm releasing the report. The interpretation would come later if asked.
So when you are creating this report, because there is femoral blood, you're aware that a death has occurred,
Yes.
But you don't have much other information about what's going on.
No.
When you created this report and initially made your findings, were you aware that insulin was involved in this case?
I do not believe so, no.
At some point, did you learn that insulin was involved?
Yes.
Do you remember when you found that out?
Well, I would have found it out for sure during like a pretrial meetings and pretrial calls. There is a submission form that gets sent in from the submitting agency. I don't remember if insulin was noted in that. Like I said, most of the time we get almost no information. So when I focus on the review of cases, it's normally just the demographics, like the name, the submitting agency, things like that. I don't really look at the case history at that point because it doesn't matter to me.
Before you knew that insulin was involved, based on the results that we see here, did it make sense to you that somebody would have died solely from these drugs at the levels that we're seeing present here?
I would not have expected someone to die unless, like I said, there were special circumstances, and that does come up sometimes, and that would normally be through conversation with a medical examiner on what they found at autopsy.
Do any of these drugs listed interact with insulin in a way that explains death?
I am not aware of that.
At some point, were you made aware of Ms. Terry's glucose level when she was taken to the hospital?
No.
Based on your training and experience, would it be typical of somebody to die based solely on the drugs that we see present here, absent some other circumstance?
I would say not outside of special circumstances.
Is insulin being on board, would you consider that a special circumstance?
Yes.
Does that, I guess, illuminate your findings or your conclusions here in any way?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, in a way that it would answer as a more obvious potential cause of death than this drug grouping. But again, I want to stress that, determining cause of death is not really the job of a toxicologist. That's the job of a medical examiner.
Fair enough. Maybe I failed to ask you this. What lab do you work for?
I work for NMS Labs.
Does your lab test for insulin?
We do not, no.
Why not?
There are real analytical challenges with testing for insulin. So we had a test years ago, and before I even started there, and stopped testing for it, and I really don't know the background of that. But in my 20 years of working in laboratories, I've never worked in a lab that tested for insulin.
You mentioned analytical challenges to testing for insulin. Do you know more about what that might mean?
I can speak to it a little bit. I mean, I think one of the main issues is that there's both insulin produced in your body and then synthetic insulin that's given. And I think there are issues differentiating between the two.
Does stability issues in the blood relate to that at all in terms of testing for insulin?
It may. I have to admit, I don't, because I've never worked in a lab with insulin testing, I really don't have a lot of background on all of the analytical approaches, so I can't really speak very deeply in that.
Do you know of any forensic toxicology lab in the country that has the ability to test for insulin?
Not that I'm aware of, though I don't know if there is one or not.
Do you remember if you looked into it for this case?
I believe I have been asked and have looked into it, and I was not able to find one.
So we've distinguished between hospital blood and femoral blood, and on all these results that we're seeing here, the source is hospital blood. Are you able to tell how long before the blood draw at the hospital Ms. Terry would have been given or taken these medications?
No.
Would you expect, so we talked about how oxymorphone is a metabolite of oxycodone. Would you expect to see other metabolites of the other drugs involved? Does that question make sense?
It does. We do not, there would be theoretically other compounds there, but we don't test for those other compounds. When I say the term half-life of a drug, do you know what that term means? Yes.
What does it mean?
So the half-life of a drug is basically the amount of time that it takes for your body to eliminate half of the blood concentration of that drug. So, if, like for example, oxycodone has a 5-hour half-life, so you would expect the concentration to get cut in half every 5 hours.
Do different drugs have different half-lives?
Yes.
If a half-life is longer in a certain drug, what does that mean in terms of how it's breaking down in the body?
It just means it would take longer. So for example, and when I say like oxycodone is 5 and promethazine is, the half-life of promethazine is 15, that's an average. It's a broad range. Some people are much faster, some are slower, but that's the average of it. So for example, promethazine is 15 hours, so it takes 15 hours for that concentration to get cut in half, where oxycodone is 5.
Would anything in Kacee Terry's system lead you to believe that these drugs alone caused her death?
I mean, as I said earlier, this grouping of drugs is, because of the oxycodone being at 34 nanograms per mil, the grouping of the drugs was not a real cause of concern for me personally, outside of, like I said, special circumstances that the medical examiner would have determined.
Would anything about these drugs together, how they interact together, give you any additional concern for potentially causing death?
Well, I mean, all 3 of the drugs, the main drugs, oxycodone, promethazine, and alprazolam, are all central nervous system depressants. So it was something to look at and think about, and it really comes down to like the tolerance that we discussed earlier, and I would look at oxycodone as kind of the primary drug here for concern, and with that being at 34, then it lessened the concern I would have. I mean, there are certainly many examples of multi-drug toxicity overdoses with alprazolam at 100. That's actually a fairly common, but you would expect a primary drug like oxycodone to be at a much higher concentration. So.
And we're not seeing.
And we're not seeing that in this case.
Okay. I'm going to just briefly scroll down on this exhibit just so there's a bunch of Chuck's reference comments, and then it talks about these drugs. We don't have to go into each one, but what's the point of including this section in your report?
So this is a stock reference comments that are published in every report. So every time these drugs are reported out in our reports or in our cases, these stock comments get put in there, and it's basically just to help the submitting agency kind of interpret a little bit of what's going on in that case.
So nothing in this section, and it lists all the drugs that you found present here, but these are stock information. Nothing pertains particularly to Ms. Terry in this section of your report.
No, every postmortem case that oxycodone is reported out has the exact same comment.
And that's true of all the drugs we see
Yes.
listed here. If you'll scroll down a little bit. We see oxymorphone, promethazine, that section's those are all stock.
Yes.
And then I believe down here we see your signature, is that right?
Yes.
Right, I have nothing further for you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name's Scott Williams. We met on video, but otherwise have never met in person, right?
That's true.
Just a few follow-ups. We've got these levels that you're able to detect when you're doing your toxicology assessment, right?
Yes.
Of each of the drugs, and you've gone through them. By the way, let's talk about how these drugs might get in the body. Overwhelmingly, oxycodone is orally ingested, right?
That is true, yes.
Promethazine is generally orally ingested.
Yes,
Alprazolam is generally orally ingested, correct?
yes.
All right, and then let me touch the promethazine just for a second, because you indicated, I mean, it is not even a controlled substance. You can buy it over the counter.
Yes,
And while it could act as a central nervous system depressant, it sometimes acts the opposite, right?
with certain people, yes.
So like me with my allergy pills.
Exactly.
Sudafed can do that, right? It can
Yep.
make people sleepy, or it can make people shaky.
Yep,
And as you indicated, promethazine, considered an antihistamine, right?
yes.
You looked at the promethazine aspect of this case and didn't see anything that was out of the normal in terms of the levels.
I mean, I would interpret that as someone that was just taking it probably continuously over a couple days. But,
Sorry to interrupt.
well, I just wanted to clarify, but, you know, I wouldn't have any information to know that for sure.
Let's touch on that real quick. In
Mhm.
your role here and in working with the prosecutor's office and such, were you provided information about the case?
I was provided a small amount during like a pretrial hearing.
But not a medical history?
No, I never.
Of the deceased, right?
No.
So, what your interpretations are in general?
Yeah, based on just 20 years of experience in reviewing many, many cases.
In all those many, many cases, in reviewing those, you look at this and it looks like a pretty regular promethazine user's result.
Yes.
Looks like an oxycodone user's drug result, I think you indicated, as far as you can tell.
Yes, I mean, this falls very much in the expected therapeutic range.
Now, with the potential, well, the metabolite, to understand how much, assuming the oxymorphone is a metabolite. Again, you can't be sure, it's possible. That drug can be orally ingested as well, right?
Yes,
It's combinative in its effects with oxycodone.
yes.
And, but it can also be a metabolite, and you, with your experience, interpreted that's probably what's going on here.
Probably based on that ratio, you know, if the oxymorphone was at, say, equal concentrations, then I would think either both drugs may have been taken, or there may be some sort of metabolic metabolism, polymorphism, or change in this person that maybe doesn't allow the breakdown of that drug as normal humans would.
All right, and also we have a half-life. So if this oral medication, the time that it's taken, over the period between that and this blood result that gives you the toxicology analysis ability, this is metabolizing, right? And while it sounds to me like you're saying it really varies greatly with different people in different circumstances, et cetera, it's about a 5-hour half-life.
Yes.
So does this tell you anything, given, notwithstanding the generalizations and the basic estimations that are involved, about how much somebody would have taken, say, 6 hours before to have this result, what the result would have been closer in time to 6 hours before?
Well, I mean, theoretically, 6 hours, you could roughly double it. But again, that's a general.
Right, I was trying to understand because I don't, otherwise, it's certainly not the way you do what a 5-hour half-life is, and whether I was correct in suggesting that she could have had a result double that, 6 hours, double that.
Yeah.
6 more hours before.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot, I mean, it takes roughly 5 half-lives in general to eliminate a drug from a system. But, you know, I'm not able to, because I'm not sure if you're asking this, so I just want to clarify, you know, I'm not able to look at this drug concentration and make any sort of predictions on how much was taken or when it was taken.
Right,
Okay.
we might call that reverse extrapolation,
Yeah.
right? But if you knew how much somebody took, strike that, I'm sorry, the half-life, as you indicated, would go from a large number to half of that in 5 hours, right?
Yes.
So, again, these estimations, but with this numbers, we've got a 68, according to that, we would have a 68 nanogram level, presumably, and 6 hours before this result.
Theoretically, yes.
And then, what about 6 hours before that?
I mean, yeah, you could just keep doing that
Keep
math,
doubling,
but
right?
again, you know, for that to be kind of meaningful, I would, you know, you'd have to kind of know when the drug was being taken and things like that, right?
Right. I mean, you would, for instance, you could know if you knew a time that almost certainly a drug wasn't being administered by the person orally, right? If you knew the last time,
Yes, yes,
then you would have a better idea of extrapolating.
yes.
And then you indicated your sort of toxicologist opinions about how these would impact the person whose blood you're testing. And you did agree, didn't you, that this alprazolam level is at the low threshold of, according to those stock ranges of death, right?
Or at the high end of therapeutic, but yes, in certain drug combinations, it can be found in that.
And
depth.
half full, half empty, but
Yeah.
your own stock
Mm-hmm.
description here is that it's therapeutic to a certain range, and frankly, then you indicate a range that could result in death, and that's just in relation to alprazolam, right? On your stocks.
Yes,
Yeah.
and usually those are not alprazolam alone, but alprazolam with other drugs.
Like opiates.
Yes.
And then that's because there's combinative effects of all of these things, especially when they're central nervous system depressants, right?
Yes.
But when you were asked about each of these drugs and in combination, questions on the subject, it sounds to me that ultimately you leave it up to a medical examiner to make final conclusions about cause of death.
I mean, it's just not part of my job.
And it is part of the medical examiners, that's your understanding.
Yes.
Nothing further, thank you.
Any follow-up?
Just very briefly. I just want to make clear that the names that we're talking about, for instance, promethazine and alprazolam, are there other names for these drugs that people may typically hear?
I mean, these are the scientific names. There would be trade names tied to all of these on like what you would, if you received a prescription, there'd be a name tied to that, like Xanax.
Okay, so Xanax is what?
Is alprazolam.
Is there a different name for promethazine that you might see more commonly?
It, you know, it may be in Zyrtec. It's just over-the-counter allergy medication. I honestly am not 100% sure which ones. These drugs can be found in different trade names.
Okay.
So,
Mr. Williams asked you a bit about half-lives and if you're able to double the amount. You said theoretically you can do that, but that's not something that you would rely on without knowing when a drug was taken. Is that fair?
yes.
And why is that not reliable?
Well, I mean, you just can't do it forever. I mean, you can theoretically say, for example, with oxycodone, that 5 hours before it may have doubled in concentration on average. But, you know, if you try and extend that too far back, then you start getting into unknowns that I just don't have information on.
If we just double the oxycodone level here one step, Again, my math is bad, 68, I believe. Is that still within therapeutic range for somebody that has been taking it and has some kind of tolerance?
Yes.
Nothing further, thank you.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. You can step down.
Thank you.
This witness be released.
No objection.
Yes.
Here you go. Stay ready with your next witness.
Yes, Your Honor, statement called Dr. Ben Murray.